Hello, my friend. Today I bring you another lost legend from the depths of Middle-earth. Close your eyes, feel the magic surround you. Our journey begins. The day Minas Tirith almost fell before. Sauron's return. LOTR Lore. Audio story. Section 1. Shadowed Beginnings. In the year 2851 of the Third Age, when Sauron yet dwelt in secret within the fortress of Dol Guldur, and his name was spoken only as the Necromancer, there came a day when the white city of Minas Tirith trembled upon the very edge of ruin. Few now recall this tale, for it was overshadowed by the greater war that followed, yet it was a day when all of Gondor might have fallen into darkness, and the realm of men might have ended before the War of the Ring was ever fought. The morning dawned grey and still, with mist clinging to the lower circles of the city like grasping fingers. Upon the citadel, the white tree stood bare against the pale sky, its branches reaching upward as if in silent supplication. Denethor the Elder, ruling steward of Gondor, stood upon the highest tower, his weathered hands gripping the stone parapet as he gazed eastward towards the mountains of shadow. For 7 nights running, the beacons of warning had flickered strangely in the distance, not the bright flame that called for aid, but a sickly green light that seemed to pulse with malice. The guards spoke in whispers of shapes moving in the darkness beyond the Pelennor fields, of horses found dead with no mark upon them, and of wells that had turned bitter overnight. "My lord," came a voice from behind him. Denethor turned to see his captain, Turin's son of Hurin, his face grave beneath his helm. The eastern watchtowers report movement in great numbers. Something vast approaches from the direction of Ithilien. Denethor's jaw tightened. In all his years as steward, he had never felt such dread settle upon his heart. The very air seemed thick with foreboding, as if the shadow of some ancient evil had fallen across the land. "Sound the alarm," he commanded, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at him. "Wake every man who can bear arms. Whatever comes upon us this day, Minas Tirith shall not fall while I draw breath." Yet even as he spoke these words, Denethor felt in his heart that this day would test the very foundations of the realm, and that forces beyond his understanding were moving like pieces upon some vast and terrible board. Below in the city, the great horn of Gondor began to sound its deep, mournful call across the 7 levels, echoing from stone to stone, warning all who heard it that the shadow had come at last to their very gate. Section 2. A whisper in the trees. Far to the north, in the golden halls of Lothlorien, where time moved differently and the ancient ways still held sway, Lady Galadriel stood beside the mirror of her making. The still waters reflected not her fair face, but images of darkness gathering like storm clouds across Middle-earth. She had seen this vision before, in dreams that came unbidden in the grey hours before dawn. "Ada," came a voice soft as wind through leaves. Celeborn approached through the melon trees, his silver hair catching the filtered light. "The mirror shows you troubling things again." Galadriel's eyes, deep as the wells of starlight, remained fixed upon the water. "The shadow stirs, beloved, not yet the great darkness that shall come, but something immediate, something that threatens to unravel all our careful preparations." She gestured to the images swirling in the mirror's depths. "See how the white city trembles. See how the enemy tests our resolve before his master reveals himself. In the mirror, they watched as strange shapes moved across the Pelennor fields like spilled ink upon parchment. These were not orcs or trolls, but something older, something that had slept in the deep places of the earth and now stirred at the call of a voice both ancient and terrible. "The mouth of Sauron works his master's will," Galadriel whispered, her voice barely audible above the sighing of the trees. "He sends forth the sleepers of Nurn, the bound spirits that were chained in the days when Gil-galad still bore Vilya. If they break the walls of Minas Tirith now, before the ring-bearer is found, before the paths are opened." She did not finish the thought, but Celeborn understood. The careful balance they had maintained, the slow gathering of strength and hope, all would be undone. The West would fall piecemeal, realm by realm, until only scattered kingdoms remained to face the final darkness. "Then we must act," Celeborn said simply. "The White Council must be summoned." "Saruman will not come," Galadriel replied, her voice heavy with sorrow. "Already the shadow of his pride clouds his judgment. He thinks himself wise enough to use the darkness for his own ends." She turned from the mirror at last, and in her eyes was both grief and terrible resolve. "No, my lord, this burden falls to others. The Grey Pilgrim walks even now toward the source of this evil, though he knows not what he shall find there." As if summoned by her words, a wind arose in the golden wood, carrying with it the scent of distant fires and the sound of horns blown in desperation. The leaves of the Malorn trees whispered secrets in the tongue of the Eldar, and Galadriel closed her eyes to listen. "Mithrandir," she breathed, "may the light of Erendil go with you, for you walk now into such darkness as has not been seen since the fall of the Lamp of the Valar." Section 3. The Lone Rider. 3 days' ride from Minas Tirith, upon the ancient road that wound through the brown lands toward the dark forest of Mirkwood, a lone horseman urged his mount forward against the dying light. Gandalf the Grey sat bent in his saddle, his weathered staff across his knees, his keen eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the evil that he could feel pressing upon the world like a weight upon his shoulders. Shadowfax, greatest of the Miaras, snorted and stamped beneath him, sensing his rider's urgency. The great horse's coat was grey as morning mist, and his eyes held an intelligence that spoke of the elder days when the line of Felaroth first answered to the Rohirrim. Now he bore a wizard upon an errand that might determine the fate of all the free peoples. "Easy, my friend," Gandalf murmured, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I know you feel it too, the wrongness that spreads from the south and east like poison in clear water. But we cannot ride faster than wisdom, nor arrive before we have understood what awaits us." For 7 days, Gandalf had been troubled by dreams that came to him in the grey hours before dawn. Dreams of Minas Tirith burning, of the white tree withering, of darkness spreading across Gondor like a tide that would never recede. In these visions, he had seen shapes moving in the old places of power, shapes that should have remained bound until the ending of the world. The necromancer of Dol Guldur had been growing in strength. This much the White Council knew, but this felt different, more immediate. This was not the slow corruption that they had watched spread through Mirkwood like a blight upon the leaves. This was something active, deliberate, and directed with purpose toward a single goal. As the last light faded from the western sky, Gandalf saw before him the lights of a small village. But even from a distance, he could see that something was wrong. The lights were too few, too scattered, and they flickered with an unsteady glow that spoke of fear rather than comfort. He rode into the village as night fell completely and found the streets empty save for a few villagers who hurried past with their heads down, avoiding his gaze. The inn was nearly deserted, its common room lit by a single candle that cast dancing shadows upon the walls. "Traveler," said the innkeeper, a thin man with nervous eyes, "you should not have come here. The roads are not safe, and worse things than bandits walk in the darkness now." "What manner of things?" Gandalf asked, his voice gentle but commanding attention. The man glanced toward the shuttered windows. "They came from the south 3 nights ago. Tall they were, and wrapped in darkness that seemed to drink the light. They spoke to no one, but wherever they passed, the very air grew cold and bitter. They were asking questions about the White City, about the roads that lead there, about how many men guard the gates." Gandalf felt his heart grow heavy with foreboding. "And where did they go?" "North," the innkeeper whispered, "towards the old forest, toward the place men call Dol Guldur." Section 4. Dol Guldur in the distance. Dawn broke grey and cheerless over the forest of Mirkwood as Gandalf rode the last miles toward the Hill of Sorcery. The very air seemed thick and oppressive, as if the shadow that dwelt within the ancient fortress pressed outward against the world, seeking to smother all light and life beneath its weight. Dol Guldur rose before him like a broken tooth against the sky, its black towers twisted and malformed as if shaped by some evil will rather than the hands of craftsmen. Once it had been a fair tower, built in the elder days when Gil-galad held dominion over all the lands between the mountains and the sea. Now it was a thing of nightmare, wreathed in clouds that seemed to move with purpose and intent. Shadowfax would go no further. The great horse stamped and whinnied, his nostrils flaring at scents that spoke of corruption and decay. "I understand, my friend," Gandalf said softly, dismounting and placing a gentle hand upon the horse's neck. "This is no place for creatures of light and air. Wait for me here, in the clean wind, and if I do not return before the moon sets, carry word to Lothlorien." Alone now, Gandalf began the slow ascent toward the fortress. With each step, the oppression grew heavier, until it seemed that the very earth beneath his feet was reluctant to bear his weight. The trees that lined the path were withered and black, their branches reaching toward him like grasping claws. No bird sang in these woods, no insect hummed among the dead leaves. As he climbed, memories came unbidden to his mind, memories of this place as it had been in the glory days of the Second Age, when it was called Amon Lank, the Naked Hill, and its beacon fires burned bright against the darkness. He remembered the banners that had flown from its walls, the songs that had echoed from its halls, the hope that had dwelt within its stones. All of that was gone now, devoured by the shadow that had made this place its stronghold. Yet as Gandalf looked upon the twisted spires and broken walls, he began to understand something that chilled his heart more than the corrupted air around him. This was not the slow decay of a fortress abandoned to time and weather. This was active, purposeful destruction, as if some great power had taken the very stones and reshaped them according to its will. And if that power was strong enough to transform the works of the elves of old, what might it do to the walls of Minas Tirith? "So," he murmured to himself, his breath visible in the unnatural cold. The enemy grows bold indeed, but boldness oft leads to overreach, and overreach to downfall. Yet even as he spoke these words of hope, Gandalf could not shake the feeling that he walked towards something that was greater and more terrible than anything the necromancer had yet revealed. The very air hummed with malice, and in the distance he could hear the sound of drums, not the drums of orcs, but something deeper, more ancient, as if the earth itself was being beaten like a great war drum to herald the coming of some primordial darkness. Section 5. Into the Black. The gates of Dol Guldur stood open like a wound in the world, their iron teeth twisted and melted as if by some great heat that had burned from within. No guards watched from the walls. No sentries challenged his approach. Yet Gandalf felt the weight of countless eyes upon him as he stepped across the threshold into the realm of the necromancer. The silence was absolute, not the peaceful quiet of an empty place, but the oppressive hush of a tomb sealed for millennia. His footsteps echoed strangely in the corridors, as if the sound traveled through dimensions he could not see, carrying word of his presence to listeners in realms beyond the circles of the world. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with a life that was not life, and as Gandalf passed deeper into the fortress, he began to see that the very stones had been carved with symbols that hurt the eyes to look upon. These were not the fair scripts of the elves or the noble runes of the dwarves, but something older and more terrible, the black speech of Mordor, graven deep into the living rock. Ash Nazg Durbatuluk, he read, his voice barely a whisper in the oppressive gloom. Ash Nazg Gimbatul, the words of binding and dominion, the formula of the great ring that lay even now hidden in the Shire, unknown to its bearer. How came these words to be written here, in this place of shadow, when the ring itself was lost and the Dark Lord dwelt in hiding? As if summoned by his reading of the accursed words, a voice echoed through the halls, not heard with the ears, but felt in the very bones, in the marrow and sinew of his being. It spoke in the common tongue, but beneath the words was a harmony of malice that belonged to no creature of flesh and blood. Welcome, Grey Wanderer. Long has this fortress awaited your coming. Long have we prepared for this hour when you would stand at last within our web. Gandalf gripped his staff more tightly, feeling its familiar weight and the clean power that dwelt within it. Show yourself, servant of shadow. I have not come to play games of words in the darkness. Laughter echoed from the walls, from the very stones themselves, as if the fortress had become a living thing that fed upon despair. Show myself. But I am all around you, Mithrandir. I am in every stone of this place, in every shadow, in every breath of putrid air that fills your lungs. I am the mouth that speaks for one greater than kings, the hand that reaches forth to seize what lesser powers think to hold. And then Gandalf understood. This was not the necromancer speaking, not the shade of the enemy that dwelt in Dol Guldur. This was something else entirely, a herald, a forerunner sent ahead to prepare the way. The true master remained hidden still, but his servants walked abroad with power enough to threaten the mightiest fortresses of the West. Section 6. The Captive King. In the deepest dungeon of Dol Guldur, where the roots of the corrupted hill ran down into the very bones of the earth, Gandalf found what he had not expected to find, and what perhaps he had come seeking without knowing it. There, chained with bonds of black iron that seemed to drink the light from his staff, sat a figure that had once been a king among men. The man was tall, even seated, with the noble bearing of the Númenóreans still visible despite his captivity. His hair had gone white as winter snow, and his eyes held the depth of one who had looked upon both great beauty and terrible sorrow. His clothes, though torn and stained, had once been rich, the raiment of a king or high lord. "Who are you that comes with light into this place of shadow?" the prisoner asked, his voice carrying the accent of Gondor's northern provinces. "I am Gandalf the Grey," the wizard replied, studying the strange symbols that bound the chains to the wall. "And you, Lord, are far from home if my ears do not deceive me." A bitter smile crossed the man's face. "Home? I have no home now, Mithrandir. I am Ernur, son of Eärnil, last king of Gondor, though I suppose by now the stewards rule in my place, and my name is remembered only as a cautionary tale." Gandalf's heart grew heavy at these words. King Ernur, who had ridden to Minas Morgul in answer to the Witch King's challenge and never returned. That was more than 400 years ago. Yet here he sat, neither dead nor truly alive, preserved by some dark sorcery for purposes that Gandalf dared not contemplate. "How long have you been here, my lord?" Gandalf asked gently. "Time has no meaning in this place," Ernur replied. "I have seen kingdoms rise and fall in visions forced upon me. I have watched my city grow great and proud while I sit helpless in these chains. They keep me alive, wizard, as a witness to their power, as a trophy of their victory over the realm of men. And what do they seek from you?" Ernur's eyes grew distant, filled with a pain that spoke of torments beyond physical suffering. "Knowledge, the secrets of Minas Tirith, the old passwords, the hidden ways, the weaknesses in the walls that only the kings knew. They have tried to break my will with pain and with fair words alike, but I have told them nothing." Gandalf reached toward the chains, but drew back as his fingers neared the black iron. The metal radiated a cold that went beyond the physical, and he could see that touching it would bring agony beyond description. "There is more, isn't there?" he said quietly. "Something they plan, something that requires your knowledge." The former king nodded slowly. "They spoke freely before me, thinking me broken past caring. There is to be an assault upon Minas Tirith, not by armies, but by something else, something that will turn the very stones of the city against its defenders. They need the old words of binding, the formulae by which the walls were raised in the days of Isildur. With those words," he shuddered, "with those words, they can make the White City tear itself apart from within." Section 7. The Necromancer's Voice. Even as King Ernur spoke these words of doom, the temperature in the dungeon began to drop until their breath misted in the air. The shadows in the corners grew deeper and more solid, as if darkness itself was taking shape and substance. Gandalf felt the familiar weight of great evil pressing down upon him. But this was different from what he had sensed before. Older, more patient, infinitely more cunning. "So," came a voice that seemed to arise from the stones themselves, "the Grey Fool has found our little prize. Tell me, Mithrandir, what do you think of our collection?" The voice was cultured, refined even, but beneath its smooth tones lay such malice that both Gandalf and Ernur felt their hearts grow cold. This was not the crude roaring of orcs or the bestial hunger of trolls, but something that had once been fair and wise now corrupted into something infinitely more dangerous. I think, Gandalf replied carefully, that you have overreached yourself, servant of the Shadow. The bonds that hold this king are strong, but they are not beyond breaking. And Minas Tirith stands yet, whatever plans you may weave in this place of darkness. Laughter echoed through the chamber, and now Gandalf could see a shape forming in the deepest shadows, tall and robed in black, with eyes like burning coals set in a face that was beautiful and terrible to behold. Breaking, yes, the necromancer said, stepping forward into the pale light of Gandalf's staff. But not by you, Grey Wanderer. You have power, it is true, but not the kind of power that can shatter the chains of Mordor iron forged in the fires of Mount Doom. Gandalf studied his ancient enemy, seeing in that fair face the echo of what Sauron had been in the far days of the world's youth. One of the Maiar, a servant of Aulur the Smith, fallen now beyond all hope of redemption. Then why do you hold him still? Why not simply take what you need and be done with it? Because, the necromancer replied, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, there are protocols to be observed, rituals to be completed. The old magic that protects Minas Tirith is strong. It was woven by Gil-galad himself in the days when the last alliance still seemed possible of victory. To break such wards requires more than force. It requires the willing betrayal of one who has sworn to protect them. The truth struck Gandalf like a physical blow. You do not seek to torture the words from him. You seek to turn him, to make him speak them willingly. At last, you begin to understand. The necromancer circled them like a hunting cat, his movements graceful and predatory. For 4 centuries, I have worked upon his mind, showing him vision after vision of his city's suffering, wars that could be prevented, plagues that could be cured, famines that could be averted, all of it possible, if only he would speak a few simple words. King Erna raised his head, and in his eyes was a pain beyond physical torment. He shows me my people dying while I sit here in comfort and safety. He shows me children starving while I preserve my honor intact. How long can any man resist such visions? Section 8. Fire in the darkness. Long enough, Gandalf said firmly, raising his staff until its crystal tip blazed with white fire that drove back the shadows clustering around them. Long enough for hope to find a way, and for light to triumph over darkness. The necromancer hissed and stepped back, his beautiful face twisting with fury. Your light is nothing here, grey fool. This is my realm, shaped by my will, sustained by my power. Your little flame cannot stand against the darkness of Dol Guldur. But even as he spoke, Gandalf began to chant in the high tongue of the elves, words of binding and unbinding that had been old when the mountains were young. The white light spread from his staff to encompass both himself and the captive king, and where it touched the black iron of the chains, the metal began to smoke and crack. Impossible, the necromancer snarled, raising his own hands to weave counterspells of shadow and binding. The chains were forged by my master's own hand. They cannot be broken by any power in Middle-earth. Then it is fortunate, Gandalf replied through gritted teeth, that the power I wield comes not from Middle-earth alone. The light blazed brighter still, and now it began to take on a golden hue that spoke of realms beyond the circles of the world. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot stand against me. The battle that followed was not one of sword and shield, but of will against will, of light against darkness, of hope against despair. The very foundations of Dol Guldur shook as the two powers clashed, ancient stones cracking and walls groaning under the strain. Where Gandalf's light touched the corrupted symbols carved into the walls, they blazed with white fire and then crumbled to dust. The necromancer fought with all the cunning and malice of ages, weaving illusions and shadows, calling up phantoms of despair and visions of defeat. But Gandalf stood firm, his staff held high, speaking words of power that had not been heard in Middle-earth since the Elder Days. Slowly, inexorably, the chains binding King Erna began to crack and splinter. The black iron, forged in the fires of Mount Doom and quenched in the waters of the Morgulduin, could not withstand the pure flame of the west. With a sound like thunder, the first chain snapped, then the second, then the third. "This is not possible," the necromancer cried, his voice rising to a shriek that echoed through all the halls of his fortress. "My master's power is supreme. The darkness is eternal." "Your master," Gandalf said quietly as the last chain fell away and King Erna rose to his feet for the first time in 4 centuries, "is a creature of shadow and flame. But I serve the flame imperishable, which burns at the heart of all creation. Against that light, no darkness can stand forever." The necromancer's form began to waver and fade, his power broken by the destruction of his carefully woven prison. "You have won this battle, Grey Wanderer," he hissed as his voice grew distant. "But the war goes on. Even now, my servants march upon Minas Tirith. You are too late to save it." And with those words, he was gone, leaving behind only the echo of malicious laughter and the stench of corruption slowly fading from the air. Section 9. Return to the Wise. The journey from Dol Guldur to Lothlorien passed like a dream half remembered. King Erna, freed from his chains, but still weak from his long captivity, rode behind Gandalf on Shadowfax, speaking little, but watching everything with the wonder of one who sees the world anew after centuries of darkness. The corruption of Mirkwood seemed less oppressive now, as if the breaking of the prison had weakened the necromancer's hold upon the forest itself. They came to the Golden Wood as the sun was setting, painting the Mallen trees in shades of fire and amber. The elven guards who met them at the borders showed no surprise. Indeed, it seemed they had been expected. Without words, they were escorted through the twilight paths to the heart of Caras Galadhon, where the Lady and Lord of Lothlorien awaited them upon the high flet of their dwelling. "Mithrandir," Galadriel said as they climbed the spiral stairs that wound around the great Mallen trunk. "Your light shines brighter than when you departed, and you bring with you one long thought lost to the world." King Erna bowed deeply before the Lady of Light, and Gandalf saw that some of the shadow had already begun to pass from his eyes. "My lady," the king said formally, "I am in your debt, and in the debt of the Grey Pilgrim, who freed me from bonds I had thought would hold me until the ending of the world." "The ending of one world, perhaps," Celeborn said gravely, stepping forward to clasp the king's hand in greeting. "But new worlds are ever being born, and in each there is place for courage such as yours. 4 centuries you have held your silence against all the torments of the enemy. Few could have endured so long." Galadriel gestured toward the mirror that stood upon the flet, its silver basin filled with clear water that reflected the stars appearing overhead. "But there is little time for celebration," she said, her voice heavy with urgency. "See what even now transpires in the south." Gandalf and Erna looked into the mirror's depths, and there they saw visions that made their hearts grow cold. Dark shapes moved across the Pelennor fields, not orcs or men, but things of shadow that seemed to drink the light from the very air around them. They saw the walls of Minas Tirith, proud and white, but around their foundations, something like black root or vine was spreading, eating into the stone itself. "The sleepers of Narn," Erna whispered, recognizing shapes from old lore and older nightmares. "I thought them bound until the last day." "Bound they were," Gandalf said grimly, "but the necromancer has learned much in his years of exile. He cannot break the great bonds himself, but he can loosen them, shall we say. Let slip just enough of their power to serve his immediate purpose." "And what is that purpose?" Celeborn asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "To test the defenses of the West before the true assault begins," Gandalf replied. "To probe for weaknesses, to spread despair, to convince the free peoples that resistance is hopeless. If Minas Tirith falls now by treachery rather than siege, then who will stand when the true darkness comes?" Galadriel closed her eyes, and for a moment she looked every year of her long age. "Then we must ensure that it does not fall. The White Council must act, not in debate and deliberation, but in deed." Section 10. Stirring the North. 3 days later, Gandalf rode north from Lothlorien, with purpose burning in his heart like a forge fire. The attack upon Minas Tirith would come soon, of this he was certain. But the enemy had made one crucial error. In revealing their plan too early, they had given the wise time to prepare countermeasures, time to gather allies, time to turn what should have been a surprise assault into something else entirely. The road to Erebor was long and hard, winding through the Vale of Anduin and up into the grey mountains where the lonely mountains stood proud against the sky. Gandalf drove Shadowfax hard, pausing only when absolutely necessary, for he could feel the weight of time pressing upon him like a physical thing. King Erna had chosen to remain in Lothlorien for the present, to regain his strength and to commune with the mirror of Galadriel. "I have much to atone for," he had said simply. 4 centuries of captivity may not have broken my tongue, but they have broken my strength. I am not yet ready to take up sword and crown again. But there were others in the north who were ready, others who had been waiting for just such a call to arms. The dwarves of Erebor had grown rich and proud in the years since Smaug's death, but they had not grown soft. In their great halls beneath the mountain, axes were still sharp and hammers still rang upon anvils, forging weapons that could cleave trollhide and pierce orc mail. Thorin Oakenshield was long dead, but his nephews Fili and Kili ruled now in his stead, and they remembered the debts owed to those who had helped reclaim their ancestral home. More importantly, they remembered the wisdom of alliances, the strength that came from standing together against the darkness. Gandalf found them in the great forge hall, supervising the creation of a suit of mail that glittered like captured starlight. They greeted him with joy and wonder, for it had been many years since the grey pilgrim had walked the halls of Erebor. "Mithrandir," Fili called out, his face breaking into a grin beneath his braided beard. "What brings you to our halls in such haste?" You look as though you have ridden through fire and shadow." "In a manner of speaking, I have," Gandalf replied grimly, "and I come bearing tidings that will require all your courage and all your strength. The enemy stirs again, and this time his reach extends to the very heart of Gondor." As the wizard told his tale of Dol Guldur and the captive king, of the necromancer's plan and the shadow creatures that even now threatened Minas Tirith, the faces of the two dwarf lords grew grave and stern. They were not the young adventurers who had followed their uncle on a mad quest to reclaim their homeland, but seasoned rulers who understood the weight of the choices before them. "What would you have us do?" Kili asked when the tale was finished. "Our axes are sharp and our warriors eager, but Minas Tirith is far from here, and we are not numerous enough to march to war across half of Middle-earth." "I do not ask you to march," Gandalf replied. "I ask you to forge. In the deep vaults of Erebor lie mithril and other precious things. With your skill and my knowledge, we can create weapons that will serve in the battle to come. Weapons that can wound even the sleepers of Nirn." Section 11. A Hobbit Remembered. While hammer rang on anvil in the halls of Erebor, and the dwarves worked their ancient magic upon mithril and steel, Gandalf's thoughts turned to another place entirely. A green country far to the west, where round doors opened onto gardens filled with flowers, and folk of small stature lived lives of comfortable contentment. The Shire seemed impossibly distant from the darkness that threatened Minas Tirith. Yet Gandalf found himself thinking often of one particular hobbit who dwelt there. Bilbo Baggins had surprised many folk in his time, not least himself, and the wizard could not shake the feeling that before this tale was ended, the little burglar might have a part to play once more. It had been several years since Gandalf had last visited Bag End, but he remembered well the round study with its circular window looking out over the garden, and the hobbit who sat there in the evenings, writing in a large book bound in red leather. Bilbo had been composing his memoirs, he had said, the true account of the adventure that had taken him from his comfortable hobbit hole to the lair of a dragon and back again. But there had been something else, something Bilbo had not spoken of openly, a secret that the hobbit guarded carefully, hidden away in his own heart as thoroughly as it was hidden away in his home. Gandalf had suspected but not pressed, for there were some truths that must come to light in their own time. Now, as he watched the dwarves forge weapons of power and beauty, the wizard found himself wondering if that time was drawing near. The ring that Bilbo had found in the goblin tunnels beneath the Misty Mountains, the ring that the hobbit claimed was merely a useful trinket for avoiding unwanted visitors. That ring had always troubled Gandalf's dreams. There had been something about it, something that whispered of greater significance than its simple appearance would suggest. A plain gold band, unremarkable save for its curious property of rendering its wearer invisible. Such magic was rare, but not unknown in the world. And yet, when Gandalf had looked upon it with the eyes of his power, he had seen shadows that had no business being there, shadows that spoke of distant fires and a will that was not the will of any good thing. He had thought to investigate further, but other matters had always intervened. The growing darkness in Mirkwood, the stirrings of evil in the east, the thousand small crises that demanded the attention of the wise. Perhaps, he thought now, That had been an error. Perhaps some things that seemed small and insignificant were, in truth, the hinges upon which the fate of the world would turn. The ring lay quiet now in the depths of the Shire, and its bearer lived a life of peaceful retirement, unaware that he possessed anything more significant than a family heirloom. But peace was a fragile thing, and retirement a luxury that might soon be denied to all who loved the light. If the darkness could not be turned back at Minas Tirith, if the White City fell and despair spread across the lands of men, then even the Shire, with all its gardens and its round doors, might not remain untouched forever. One thing at a time, Gandalf murmured to himself, watching the sparks fly from the dwarven hammers. First, we save Minas Tirith. Then we discover what other threads must be woven into this tapestry of fate. Section 12. The plan set in motion. The weapons forged in the fires of Erebor were things of beauty and terror both. Swords that gleamed with their own inner light. Spear points that could pierce the very substance of shadow. Arrows fletched with eagle feathers and tipped with star metal. But even as the dwarves worked their craft, Gandalf knew that steel alone would not be enough to turn back the assault that was coming. On the third day, as the last of the enchanted weapons cooled in the mountain air, a messenger arrived from Lothlorien, one of the swift riders of the Galadrim, bearing word that made Gandalf's heart both rejoice and despair in equal measure. "The lady sends word," the messenger said, his grey eyes reflecting the urgency of his errand. "The attack upon Minas Tirith has begun. The sleepers of Nûn have emerged from their hiding places in the Ephel Duath, and they move across the Pelennor like a tide of darkness. But the city holds still, and its defenders fight with courage beyond hope." "How long can they endure?" Gandalf asked, though he feared the answer. "Perhaps a day, perhaps two. The creatures cannot cross the walls while the sun shines, but when night falls..." The messenger shook his head grimly. "When night falls, they grow in power and malice. The lady fears that the third dawn may not break upon a city still free." Gandalf turned to Fili and Kili, who stood beside the cooling weapons with expressions of determination on their weathered faces. "The time has come to see if our work has been in vain. Will you ride with me, sons of Durin? Will you take up arms once more in defense of the free peoples?" "We will," Fili replied without hesitation. "But not merely the two of us. All the company of Erebor that can bear arms shall ride with you, 500 warriors in mail and helm, mounted on the strongest ponies of our stables." "And I," said a new voice from the entrance to the forge hall, "will take wing once more, though I had thought my days of battle were long past." They turned to see a figure standing in the doorway, tall and proud, with the bearing of one accustomed to command. It was Bard, King of Dale, no longer the simple bargeman who had slain Smaug with a black arrow, but a ruler of men who had learned the weight of crown and scepter. "My lord," Gandalf said with genuine pleasure, "your presence gladdens my heart. But Dale is far from Minas Tirith, and your people have their own borders to guard." "My people," Bard replied with a slight smile, "know well the value of friendship. When the dragon came, it was aid from afar that saved us. Now, when shadow threatens another city, we remember our debts." He gestured toward the courtyard beyond, where Gandalf could see the banners of Dale flying beside those of Erebor. 300 spears of Dale stand ready to ride south, and the eagles of the Misty Mountains have promised to bear word ahead of our coming." The wizard felt a surge of hope that he had not known in many days. "Then perhaps," he said quietly, "the third dawn shall indeed break upon a city still free." Section 13. The Fire Awakens. But even as hope stirred in the halls of Erebor, a deeper darkness was awakening in the distant desolation of the south. In the ruins of Dale's sister city, where Lake Town had once prospered beneath the shadow of the lonely mountain, something that had slept in the deep waters began to stir. Smaug the Mighty was dead, his fire quenched and his tyranny ended by the black arrow of Bard the Bowman. But dragons, even in death, do not easily surrender their power, and the great worm's body had sunk deep into the cold waters of the Long Lake, where it lay among the sunken timbers and drowned treasures of the ruined town. For years, the lake had been different, its waters darker, its fish fewer, its depths troubled by currents that seemed to move with purpose rather than chance. The men of Dale spoke in whispers of dreams that came to them on windless nights, dreams of fire and gold, and a voice that called to them from beneath the waves. Now, as the shadow of the necromancer's assault fell across Minas Tirith, and the attention of the wise was turned southward, that voice grew stronger. The waters of the Long Lake began to bubble and steam, and a light that was not the light of sun or moon began to glimmer in their depths. "What is it?" whispered one of the fishermen, who still dared to cast their nets in the troubled waters. "What moves down there in the dark?" His companion, an old man who remembered the day Smaug fell, shook his head in fear. "Best not to ask," he replied. "Best not to know. Some things should stay dead and buried, even if they be buried in water rather than earth. But the dead do not always heed the wishes of the living." And as the night deepened, the glow from beneath the lake grew brighter. Shapes began to move in the water, not the shapes of fish or water weeds, but something vast and serpentine that coiled through the drowned ruins like a living thing. Miles away, in the throne room of Dale, King Bard felt a sudden chill run down his spine. He turned toward the great window that looked out over the lake and saw there a sight that made his blood run cold. The waters were glowing with a sullen red light, and steam was rising from their surface like smoke from a forge fire. "My lord," came a voice from behind him. One of his guards stood in the doorway, his face pale with fear. "The lake. Something is happening to the lake." Bard gripped the hilt of his sword, feeling once again the weight of responsibility that had settled upon him when he took the crown of Dale. He had slain one dragon with a black arrow and a prayer to the Valar. But what did one do when a dragon refused to stay dead? "Sound the alarm," he commanded, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at his heart. "Wake every man in the city. If Smaug's fire burns again beneath the lake, then we must be ready to face whatever rises from those dark waters." In the depths below, something that had once been the greatest of the fire drakes began to unfurl wings that gleamed like molten gold, and eyes like burning coals opened in the darkness of the deep. Section 14. A blade not yet drawn. In the armory of Minas Tirith, where the weapons of kings and stewards had rested for long ages, Denethor the Elder stood before a sword that had not been drawn from its sheath for over 1,000 years. The blade was ancient beyond reckoning, forged in the fires of Numenor, when that great island still stood proud above the waves of Belegar. Its name was Andúril, the Flame of the West, and it had been broken upon the slopes of Mount Doom in the last alliance of elves and men. The shards had been kept in honor in the house of the kings, waiting for the day when they might be reforged and the line of Isildur returned to claim the throne of Gondor. But that day seemed far distant now, with Isildur's heir lost in the wild lands of the north, and the shadow pressing ever closer to the White City. As Denethor looked upon the broken blade, he felt the weight of decision pressing upon him like a physical thing. "My lord," came a voice from behind him. He turned to see his son Boromir, young and proud in his mail shirt, his horn slung across his shoulder. "The creatures press closer to our walls with each passing hour. Should we not take up every weapon that might serve in our defense?" Denethor's eyes moved from the broken sword to his son's eager face. "Some weapons, my son, exact a price that is greater than the victory they might bring. This blade was made for other hands than ours, and to wield it without right might bring more curse than blessing upon our house. But if it could save the city," Boromir began. "If it could," Denethor agreed quietly. "But look upon it, Boromir. See how the metal itself seems to wait, seems to listen for the voice of one who has not yet come. This is not merely a sword, but a symbol, the symbol of a kingship that has been lost, of a lineage that may yet return to claim its inheritance." Through the narrow window of the armory, they could hear the sounds of battle growing ever closer, the clash of steel on steel, the cries of men, and beneath it all, a sound like the howling of wolves that made their hearts grow cold with fear. "The sleepers of Nurn grow bold," Boromir said grimly. "They test our defenses, probe for weakness. How long can our walls stand against such creatures?" "Long enough," Denethor replied, though in his heart he was not certain. "Long enough for aid to arrive, if aid is to come at all. The Grey Pilgrim has not forgotten us, of this I am sure. Even now, he rides south with what strength he can muster." But even as he spoke these words of hope, both father and son could feel the darkness pressing closer, like a tide that would not be turned back by walls of stone or courage of heart. The night was deepening, and with it, the power of their enemies grew stronger. "Perhaps," Denethor murmured, his eyes returning to the broken blade, "perhaps before this night is ended, we shall learn whether desperation is enough to wake the sleeping steel of ancient kings." Section 15. The kingdom reclaimed dawn came pale and cold over the Pelennor fields, and with it came the thunder of hoofbeats and the gleam of mail and spear point catching the early light. Gandalf rode at the head of a host that would have seemed small against the great armies of the elder days, but which shone now with hope and purpose that made it seem vast as the sea. Behind him rode the warriors of Erebor and Dale, their armor bright and their weapons keen, and above them flew the eagles of the misty mountains, their great wings casting shadows upon the earth below. At the wizard's right hand rode King Ernor, no longer the broken captive of Dol Guldur, but a king reclaimed, bearing a sword that had been forged in the fires of the north and blessed with words of power. "Look," called Fili, pointing toward the white walls of the city. "The banners of Gondor still fly. Minas Tirith stands." Indeed, the white city rose before them, like a crown of pearl and silver, its 7 levels gleaming in the morning light. But even from a distance, they could see the signs of siege, the dark shapes that clustered around the base of the walls like a shadow that ate light. the smoke that rose from fires within the lower circles, the wrongness that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves. "The sleepers work their corruption," Gandalf said grimly. "See how the foundation stones begin to crack and crumble? If we had come even a day later, we might have found nothing but ruins." As they drew closer, the true extent of the peril became clear. The creatures that besieged the city were like nothing in the memory of men, tall as trees and wrapped in darkness that seemed to have substance and weight. Where they touched the walls, the ancient stones began to weep tears of black ichor, and the very mortar that held them together started to dissolve. "How do we fight such things?" Kili asked, his hand tight upon his axe haft. "With light," Gandalf replied simply. "With fire and steel and the courage of free hearts. But most of all, with the knowledge that some things are worth dying for, and that death in a righteous cause is preferable to life under the shadow of evil." The eagles struck first, diving from the sky with talons extended and voices raised in cries that echoed from the mountains to the sea. Where their claws raked the sleepers of Nûn, the creatures screamed and dissolved like smoke before the wind. Then came the charge of the horsemen, with Gandalf's staff blazing like a star in the darkness, and the weapons of the north gleaming with their own inner fire. The battle that followed was brief but fierce, for the creatures of shadow could not long endure the touch of steel blessed by the power of the Valar. When the last of the sleepers had been destroyed and their corruption cleansed from the walls of the city, King Eärnur stood once more upon the stones of his realm, tears streaming down his face as he looked upon the white tree that still grew in the citadel's highest court. "For centuries," he whispered, "for centuries, I have dreamed of this moment." But Gandalf's expression remained grave, for he knew that this victory, sweet though it was, marked only the beginning of a larger war that was yet to come. Section 16. A ring still sleeps, in the green hills of the Shire, far from the clamour of battle and the clash of steel on shadow. A hobbit sat in his study, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Bilbo Baggins had felt restless all day, troubled by dreams he could not quite remember, and a sense of foreboding that he could not quite shake. He rose from his chair and walked to the round window that looked out over his garden, where the flowers bloomed in peaceful profusion and the vegetables grew in neat, well-tended rows. Everything was as it should be, as it had been for years uncounted, yet something felt different, as if the very air held a tension that spoke of changes coming with the turning of the world. His hand moved unconsciously to his waistcoat pocket, where a simple gold ring rested against his chest, warm with the heat of his body and smooth from years of handling. It was such a small thing, this ring that he had found in the goblin tunnels so long ago, yet lately it had seemed to weigh heavier than its size would warrant. Sometimes, in the deep hours of the night, he thought he heard it whispering, not with words, but with a voice that bypassed the ears entirely and spoke directly to the heart. It told him of distant places and forgotten powers, of wars that were fought in shadow and flame, of kings who rose and fell like waves upon a distant shore. Tonight, the whispers seemed louder than usual, more urgent, as if the ring itself was awakening from a long sleep and beginning to remember what it truly was. Bilbo had always known in the deepest part of his heart that his precious treasure was more than it appeared, but he had been content to let sleeping dragons lie, to enjoy the simple gifts it offered without questioning their source or their cost. Now, however, as the last light faded from the western sky and the stars began to appear one by one in the deepening blue, Bilbo felt the weight of destiny settling upon his shoulders like a cloak too heavy for his small frame to bear. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the sound of hoofbeats on the road, steady, purposeful, coming ever closer to the green door of Bag End. He knew, without knowing how he knew, that this visitor would bring news of the great world beyond the borders of the Shire, news that would shatter the peaceful quiet of his retirement like a stone thrown into still water. The ring pulsed against his chest, and for a moment, just a moment, Bilbo thought he glimpsed a vision of fire and shadow, of a great eye wreathed in flame searching, always searching, for something that had been lost and must at all costs be found again. "Well," he said quietly to himself, straightening his waistcoat and smoothing down his hair, "I suppose all adventures must come to an end eventually. The question is whether this is the end of one adventure or the beginning of another." Outside, the hoofbeats drew ever closer, and with them came the sound of a voice singing softly in the darkness, a voice he recognized, though it had been many years since last he heard it, calling his name across the miles and the years of peaceful exile. The ring grew warm against his heart, and Bilbo Baggins, burglar and hobbit and guardian of secrets he had never fully understood, walked slowly toward his door to greet whatever fate awaited him beyond its round green frame. And in the darkness that was gathering across all the lands of Middle-earth, the eye that slept began, ever so slightly, to stir. Section 17. Enemy withdraws. In the days that followed the cleansing of Minas Tirith, Gandalf led a great host northward toward Dol Guldur, determined to strike at the source of the evil while the necromancer was weakened by his defeat. The combined forces of Gondor, Erebor, and Dale marched under banners that had not been seen together since the last alliance, and their passage through the lands was like the coming of a new dawn after a long night. They found the fortress of Shadow strangely quiet, its black towers standing empty against the grey sky, like the bones of some great beast picked clean by carrion birds. The orcs and wolves that had served the necromancer had fled into the deeper woods, and the very air around the hill seemed lighter, as if some great weight had been lifted from the world. "He is gone," Gandalf said as they stood before the twisted gates. "The necromancer has withdrawn from this place, fled to some other stronghold where his master's eye does not watch so closely. King Erna, his strength restored and his sword bright in his hand, looked upon the fortress where he had spent 4 centuries in chains. 'Then let us tear it down,' he said grimly. 'Let us cast down these walls and scatter the stones, so that this place can never again serve as a haven for evil.' But Gandalf shook his head slowly. 'To destroy it would require power that we do not possess, and time that we cannot spare. The roots of Dol Guldur run deep into the earth itself, and its stones are bound with spells that were old when Gil-galad was young. But we can cleanse it, purify it, make it a place where Shadow cannot easily take root again.' And so they did. For 7 days, the armies of the Free Peoples worked to undo the corruption that had festered in that place for so long. The elves of Lothlorien came with lamps of silver light that burned away the darkness clinging to the walls. The dwarves brought hammers blessed with runes of cleansing that shattered the foul symbols carved into the stone. The men of Gondor and Dale carried water from clean springs to wash away the stains of centuries. When their work was done, Dol Guldur stood clean and empty, its towers reaching toward the sky like fingers of grey stone beneath the open heavens. It was not beautiful. Too much evil had dwelt there for beauty to return easily, but it was no longer a wound in the world, no longer a place where darkness gathered like storm clouds. "It will do," Gandalf said at last, standing upon the highest tower and looking out over the forest of Mirkwood, where already the trees seemed to stand straighter and the shadows seemed less deep. "It will do until the final darkness comes, and all such fortresses are either claimed by light or consumed by shadow." But even as they departed, leaving the empty fortress to the wind and the rain, all knew that this was not an ending, but a respite, a brief breathing space before the true war began. Section 18. Hope in Ashes. Years passed, and the world grew darker still, though few then living understood the true shape of the shadow that was falling across Middle-earth. Sauron revealed himself at last in Mordor. The One Ring was found, and lost, and found again, and the War of the Ring came upon the world like a tide of fire and blood. In those days, many looked back upon the battle for Minas Tirith as a small thing, a mere skirmish compared to the great conflicts that followed. But Gandalf, walking in his garden in the Undying Lands, when all the wars were ended and the Fourth Age had begun, knew better. He remembered a night when the White City had stood upon the very edge of ruin, and how close the world had come to falling into darkness before its time. If Minas Tirith had fallen then, if despair had taken root in the hearts of men, while the ring yet lay hidden in the Shire, would Frodo have found the courage to take up his burden? Would the hope of the West have endured long enough for the ring-bearer to reach the fires of Mount Doom? "Small hands," he murmured to himself, watching the eternal sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and silver, and quiet feet, and the courage to take one more step when all the world seems bent on ending. That is how darkness is defeated, not with great armies or mighty swords, but with the simple choice to keep walking when the road grows dark. In the distance, he could hear the voices of the hobbits, who had come at last to the Grey Havens, Frodo and Bilbo, talking quietly together of roads taken and adventures ended. Their part in the great tale was finished now, their burdens laid down, their rest well earned. But somewhere in the world they had left behind, other feet were walking other roads, other hands were taking up the tools of peace and rebuilding what war had torn down. The age of men had begun, and though it would have its own shadows and sorrows, it would also have its own light, its own hope, its own small heroes who would stand against the darkness when their time came. And that, Gandalf thought, as he turned back toward the white halls where music played and no shadow ever fell, was perhaps the greatest victory of all, not the destruction of evil, which would always return in new forms, but the preservation of good, which would always find new champions to carry it forward into whatever ages were yet to come. Thus ends the true and complete account of the day. Minas Tirith almost fell before Sauron's return, and of the small deeds that preserved great hopes, and of the paths that led from darkness into light, as recorded in the Red Book of Westmarch and verified by the Grey Pilgrim himself in the halls beyond the sunset.